My name is Craig Glover, Executive Director of North End Rise. We are the purpose-built community model in West Palm Beach, Florida. We're all of 6 months into this work, and this is my first national conference. So I want to thank the workers behind the scenes who made this happen. We've learned so much and are so encouraged to be able to take these tools back to West Palm Beach to change the lives of people living there. We're also busy doing the work of laying a foundation that focuses on trust and engagement so that we can serve those residents who deserve this work so much. As we all know and have heard repeatedly over the past 2 days, this work is very, very challenging, and it takes a lot of resources from a wide variety of sources. Everyone engaged in this work understands that it is difficult, if not impossible, to deliver transformational outcomes without philanthropy in the mix. We're very lucky today to have two leaders in that realm from two different parts of the country in which purpose-built communities are active. Kristin Williams joined the Sherwood Foundation in Omaha, Nebraska in September 2006. As Director of Community Initiatives, she is responsible for managing a diverse portfolio focused on systems change around child welfare, holistic neighborhood revitalization, housing and homelessness, economic well-being, and civic engagement. To date, her foundational influence helped spearhead several initiatives, including 75 North Revitalization Corporation. Go 75 North. Eric Kelly is the president of Quantum Foundation, a West Palm Beach-based health corporation, and is responsible for directing a multi-million-dollar community investment fund and overseeing all administrative duties of the organization. Eric is an outstanding community leader who works across the business, not-for-profit, and public sectors to ensure community improvement initiatives are sustainable and offer systemic solutions. Eric often challenges the historic assumption of doing charity in an effort instead to create effective drivers for change. He's led efforts in partnership with state, regional, and local stakeholders to improve the health and well-being of the residents of Palm Beach County. In addition, Eric is at the core of the years-long process and the major funder that's made North End Rise a reality in West Palm Beach, and for that we're very, very grateful. Please join me in welcoming Kristin Williams and Eric Kelly to the stage.
Good morning. There's nothing like talking fundraising and philanthropy first thing in the morning. So in my 13 years in philanthropy, I am frequently asked, what does it take to get funding? I've seen the coming and going of many concepts and buzzwords, and they're meant to capture donor interest and inspire confidence among program officers. Words like capacity building, collective impact, sustainability plan, any of these sound familiar? Yeah. But I've found that in the end, no matter the issue, it's the story that you tell, the one that captures the heart of the donor and makes that connection. That story will get you money. So early in my career, I came across an article. It was small, in the left-hand corner of the paper. The headline, 3 philanthropists bet on New Orleans venture as an anti-poverty model. My interest was piqued when I saw that Warren Buffett, my boss's father, was on the board of this brand new organization, Purpose-Built Communities. I began to think that maybe this could be the model for what our community leaders in Omaha have been attempting to organize for decades. So, very old school, I took out a pair of scissors, I got the article out of the paper, and I mailed it to a local community developer with a yellow sticky note attached that said, "We should do this." And then the next thing I know, there's a small group of us on an airplane on our way to visit East Lake Atlanta. It was a whirlwind, and while after 8 years, I don't remember very much about that site visit, but I do remember the stories. The vivid images of East Lake past. People robbed at gunpoint on the golf course. Carol Naughton and Shirley Franklin and their teams taking heat from understandably untrusting residents. The hard conversations, the hateful things that were said, and a whole lot of love and compromise. It is a story of perseverance and persistence, and it is the story that would lead our foundation down the bumpy road to where we are today. Because of historical redlining practices, most cities have a that side of town. Omaha, Nebraska is included. When I was in high school, we had just moved to Omaha, and I was not allowed to go to North Omaha because it was dangerous and there was gun violence, high crime rates, and drugs. 20-some years later, and I'm in my new job, and not much has changed. But now I'm going to North Omaha to work, to connect with community leaders, to find places to invest. And it's dismal. The disinvestment is palpable. I'm sitting around the table with other experienced philanthropists, and they all have their reasons why they don't invest. And they won't invest. Nobody is taking responsibility for the circumstances, and nobody is really willing to step up. They've seen way too many projects gone wrong. We tried, it didn't work. So I focused on the community quarterback. Our friends at Purpose Built, they call it the secret sauce. Someone who could rise above the judgments and assumptions and the negative accounts that were creating this brick wall between real change and charity. Our initial investment was in the story of Eastlake and the potential to see an Eastlake story in Omaha. I mean, we were going to get to learn from people who already had wins, and even more importantly, they already had losses. We were going to learn from their mistakes. What started with a $150,000 operating grant in 2010 has turned into more than $20 million in investments for everything from land acquisition to building demolitions to program support. And we have another $13 million pledged towards the $25 million HUD Choice Neighborhood Grant Omaha just received. Yeah. So our story now is about the 101 units of mixed income housing that are full and 60 senior living units coming online. It's about the children and their parents taking swimming lessons at their new swimming pool. About a park that's situated just so the children's laughter echoes throughout the neighborhood. And about a restaurant and busy coffee shop where they make their own baked goods and they roast their own coffee right there on site. We grant the neighborhood public elementary school about $1.5 million a year. Our principal had the opportunity to attend the Principal Academy at Purpose Built, and it really made a difference. So now our story includes increasing attendance and class sizes and more proficiency in math and literacy. And in January, 168 little ones will have a brand new, high-quality early childhood center. We also have a robust evaluation in place, and we are using that data to make mid-course corrections, and that's going to help us tell an even better story. Oh, and the other philanthropists in town, they are showing up. They are investing. They are proud. Now, we're pushing forward with a second site on the south side of town. And this time, we're not alone out the gate. We have a partner from another foundation who has committed as a lead. He got the story. And we were just awarded $1.3 million from HUD for a planning grant on that site. That's over $157 million in combined investments in these neighborhoods alone, and we are far from being done. While every purpose-built site is unique, we all have that same fundraising challenge. How do we get foundations to invest in the community quarterback, the glue and the grease of these community-changing models? I wish I had a simple answer, but here's the truth. Once you've seen one foundation, you've seen one foundation, right? Yeah. So working with philanthropy, it feels a lot like shaking that magic 8-ball. You never really know what you're gonna get. Sometimes it's reply hazy, try again. Sometimes it's the preferred, yes, definitely. I've watched as countless nonprofit leaders struggle to pitch their important work to foundation after foundation, twisting and tweaking the message, naming and renaming the same necessary program because the donor wants something new, but really what's old is actually working. I've seen program officers ask nonprofits to write and rewrite their grant requests over and over again, only to end up confused when they get that no thank you letter in the mail. Have you experienced anything like this? You know, it's not how you write the grant that gets the award. Sure, you have to put together a well-thought-out plan, and you have to be able to execute that plan. But rarely have I heard a program officer say, I recommended funding because the writing was just perfect. No, it's all about the relationship. It's all about trust. Have you heard the saying, those who write the checks rarely hear the truth? Those of us working in foundations are hungry for partners we can trust, partners who will speak truth to power, even in the most challenging situations. So my advice is get over your fear of philanthropy. Tell us the truth. Have hard conversations. And invite philanthropy to the table as a partner, not just to write the check. There are so many ways that foundations can be supportive to your work, whether it's bringing in additional donors, opening doors to politicians and community leaders, or just helping spread the message and sell your work. But we have to be a part of what's happening in order to make the types of connections needed, even if that's a small part. Ask us how we would like to be involved, and then follow through. You'd be amazed how many times I've heard program officers complain because they'd never received a grant application from a nonprofit that they'd spent time meeting with. The number one reason you don't get funded is you don't ask. And don't sell yourself short. If you're writing 28 grants for programs at your site, drop in a non-negotiable 15 to 20% overhead fee on every application for your critical part in this work. None of this happens without you. A good friend of mine who's also a really successful nonprofit executive director once said to me, Kristen, I am so tired of appealing to rich white people. And how can I blame him? It's exhausting. This is a fundraising game where you don't always know the rules, and even when you do, they don't always seem logical or fair. The power dynamics are uncomfortable, but really, the worst thing that can happen is someone says no. So, here's the thing. You have to do it. You can't let no be a final answer. You have to let no mean not now, try again later. Because this is not about you, and it's not about your organization. This is about undoing the decades of racially motivated wrongs perpetrated by both government and businesses to the neighborhoods we are serving. Tell their stories. So, Eric.
Yes.
Tell us your story.
Okay. Again, my name is Eric Kelly, and I have the privilege, it's an honor for me to serve as president of Quantum Foundation down in West Palm Beach, in Palm Beach County, Florida. Many of you may have heard the parable of the river. I want to begin with that parable. Before coming to Quantum, I worked for a foundation run by the nuns, the Franciscan Sisters of Allegheny. They managed hospitals all along the eastern seaboard of the United States, and in the mid-90s, when nonprofit hospitals were not able to compete with the markets and margins, many of them sold off their assets and created these foundations. The nuns used to tell this story, this parable, and it's a little weird and creepy for a breakfast parable, but nonetheless, let's go with it. If you've ever worked with nuns, you know that there's not a whole lot that's normal about those interactions, but the parable goes, there were children out playing by the river. And one day, a body came floating down the river, a lifeless body. The children were obviously alarmed, and they ran into town and they grabbed the townspeople and brought the townspeople back to the river. And So they grabbed the body out of the river. It's a Catholic story. So the priest and the folks there, they prepared the body, buried this individual, no named individual, and life continued on. A few weeks later, the children were back out at the river, and this time, several bodies came floating down the river, and same process. The children are alarmed. They run into the town. They grab the townspeople, and they come out, and again, they pull these bodies out of the river. Well, this continues on for months. And by the following year, bodies are just floating into this stream. Some are lifeless. A number of them are sick. And then there are some that are children. And so the townspeople create this elaborate system to pull bodies out of the water. And for those who were deceased, they would bury them. For those who were ill, they would find treatment for them. And for children who had somehow fallen into this river, they would create places for them to go and care for them. Well, this became the activity. The entire town was consumed with this process of pulling bodies out of the river, pulling bodies out of the river. Until finally, the thought came, why don't we go upstream and see what's killing and pushing people into the river? That parable, when I first heard it, 10, 12 years ago, it made sense because I grew up in a community where bodies were being pulled out of the river all the time. I grew up in the housing projects in a little town, a rural town. I call that the double whammy. You grow up in a rural community in the housing projects. I'll never forget the address, 505 North 23rd Street. And I saw bodies being pulled out at the end of the river. But then it did dawn on me later in my life as I began to become more involved in philanthropy, and I've spent the last 25 years in, I like to say quarter of a decade. You know, my mom would always say, you know, boy, you're an old soul. I always wanted to be an old man. I don't know why. I grew up around old folk in the country, and I love the way they act. You know, my grandfather used to sit all the time like this right here. He'd sit like this here, and he'd just watch the room as everybody walked by. And I used to think, man, that guy, he's wise. But I always wanted to be an old man. My mom would say, and I remember thinking 25 years in philanthropy, and what am I doing? And I felt like I was contributing to pulling bodies out of the river. So over these past 5 years at Quantum, I told that parable, I shared that with our board. And what I'm saying now and what we say is we've got to go upstream. And part of the story that I believe we have to tell as not-for-profit, as those in this industry of nonprofit sector, we've got to tell the story of going upstream. It's time out for pulling bodies out of the water and creating elaborate schemes and systems to care for what's already happened at the end of the stream. And I did a presentation to our board, with our board a few weeks ago entitled Reimagining Philanthropy. And that's what's going to have to happen at this point. We've got to reimagine philanthropy. You talk about, Kristen, you talk about general operating support. And believe it or not, that's a foreign concept to many foundations. But 7 years ago, that's something we started talking about with our board. And it's hard for nonprofits to explain to a foundation how general operating support works, because we all, we want to fund programs. We want to fund the things that we can see, we want to touch, we want to feel. But general operating support became one of those things as we began to reimagine philanthropy. And how do you tell the story of the resources that we need to support the organization is supporting the programs, because you need a mission to carry out the program. And so we started reimagining philanthropy, things like supporting general operating cost. And another thing, we were sitting yesterday, I went on the South Atlanta tour, and we talked about redefining sustainability. I mean, how many of us know we took it out of our application at the foundation. There's no such thing as in the nonprofit sector, sustainability is, well, we're going to come back to you next year. What?
Yeah.
And I started saying this to my colleagues. I was like, and let me just tell you a little bit about foundations. And Kristen knows, we sit in meetings, and with our pink shirts and the pocket square that doesn't match and no socks in Palm Beach. This is how you show up at meetings. And we talk about sustainability. And I look at my colleagues and I say, now you do know what sustainability means. Year 1, they're going to come to you. Year 2 and 3, back to you. Year 4, they get around to you. But that's the way it works. So I heard a statement yesterday that foundations, we've got to redefine sustainability. We've got to do what the market does not do and cannot do, because we have flexible cash that we can go in. There's always going to be a gap. I heard this yesterday. There's always going to be a gap, and what philanthropy can do is strategically close it. But we've got to educate. I'm on a couple of boards, one, the Florida Philanthropic Network, and the other, Southeastern Council of Foundations. It's a Florida-based group of foundations and the southeastern part of the U.S., 11 states, U.S. Virgin Islands, and Puerto Rico. And what I have learned is it takes a while for foundations to get this message. So reimagining
Are we
philanthropy.
slow? Is that what
We're
this
slow.
is? I mean, the part I don't understand is that the people who make these foundations
Yes.
are business people.
That's right.
So what's the business case to be made? Because you don't in Coca-Cola say, we're going to create a new product and we're not going to fund the president anymore while you do that research. But that's exactly what we do in nonprofits.
And I realize this, Kristen, many of our board members who are businessmen and women, they come to the table to do philanthropy differently than business. On one hand, it's, I want to do good, I want to do charity. And that's why I often say we have to challenge the notion of charity, because when we do charity, we think there's just good work to be done, but the people who do it should be good and kind and noble and do it at low to no cost. And we have not professionalized the sector in our minds to know that these are people who are worth the value just as anyone else. So one of the things we are trying to do at the foundation is help our board understand that it's the same professional skill set and resource needed to run the not-for-profit as is a for-profit.
Because not-for-profit is just a code that the IRS gives us
That's
for
the only
tax
difference.
purposes, right?
As a matter of fact, there are some who will say they don't call it for-profit or non-for-profit. It's just tax-exempt or you're taxed. I mean, there really is no difference in terms of the business structure and the business case. And the last thing, one of the things that I started thinking about, and this is since I've been here, and I was Carol, we were talking with Robert Wood Johnson, CEO, the evaluation. That's going to be huge and very important. And one of the reasons it's going to be important is because we've got to redefine and reframe impact and evaluation. At our board meetings, we have businessmen at the table and businesswomen, and they're tough. I mean, Carol has been in my boardroom before. They're a pretty tough group. But they sit and they have their calculators out and they want per unit cost. And they want to measure everything by per unit cost. These aren't widgets. These are people. And to provide the services that are deep into community, it requires more, and it's not an even per unit cost. So it's completely reshaping the way philanthropy thinks. And I will say this to this entire room. We need this room to help educate philanthropy. The evaluation that purpose-built communities is going to do is going to be invaluable for this room to create a new language for how foundations and funders do what we do. And the reason I say this, I remember years ago I was trained in what's called empowerment evaluation. I don't know if any of you ever went through this whole empowerment evaluation, but it's a way of doing, and then I did the United Way logic modeling, and so there are all of these models of evaluation. But the one thing that we miss in most of these models, we want to get to the outcome, but we miss all of the inputs and all of the activities and all of the outputs and the process outcome. So hopefully, as purpose-built, Carol, as you all are going through this process, you can find some key measures along the process outcome. As a matter of fact, we have invested, and thank you, Craig, we have invested in purpose-built communities in North End Rise. And we have solely invested in the planning, in the data gathering, in Craig coming on board, and Craig is being extremely humble. With just $350,000, that's all we've put in to date. North End Rise is getting ready, and I think pretty soon to sign off with our city for a $30 million allocation into this North End Rise area. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Yeah. But the thing that has to change is how we define impact. We need a guy or a woman like Craig to help bring those resources to bear. So we got to find a different way to define impact and outcomes. Yeah.
I think we should tell some some trade secrets.
Let's talk about it.
I've got one.
Okay, let's
To
talk
start.
about it.
I have heard so many program people say, we can't give them all of what they asked for.
Yep.
So here's a little insider. Ask for more so that you get what you want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do that. It works.
Yeah.
Seriously.
You got it.
I mean, we all sit around, we talk about, man, I felt like I was so heavy after telling that story. You just made me laugh good. Because, I mean, it's comical. Y'all listen, it's comical working in a foundation. Sometimes it really is comical because
Behind the curtain.
It is,
Yeah.
behind the curtains. So ask for much more. And we will feel really good about saying, well, we need to shave off. And in your mind, you're thinking, well, you're really going to shave me down to what I really need. But there is a reality about that.
Yeah.
But we understand the importance of it, but there is something in the mind that says we just need to shave a little bit off. So ask for what you need, and sometimes you need more.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't sell yourself short on the amount that you ask for because of some made up number in your mind's eye about whether or not a funder would be offended by how much you ask for.
Yeah.
There's a lot of story creation that goes on. I used to be a fundraiser, so I did this myself, and then I came over to the other side.
To
and
the
went,
other
"Wait a
side, to the
second."
dark side.
Yeah. So you really sort of have to get out of your own way and just be a good communicator, have a solid budget, but don't sell yourself short.
Yeah.
The other thing I have concerns about are the salaries of nonprofit employees. And I think it's up to philanthropy to start to push that up. And that happens with those general operating grants, like you said.
And I'm going to keep coming back to the evaluation of purpose-built communities. There has to be measures in place that show the importance of the human resource. I go back to that model of how we evaluate the inputs. One of the most important things that we can do as philanthropy is understand how important the inputs are for the outcome. You cannot get the outcomes unless you have the inputs. And those inputs and those process outcomes and those outputs, and we would teach that the outputs are just counting the widgets, how many times you do certain things, but those inputs are super important. And so we've got to make sure that whatever evaluation we do, there's some quantifying of what it takes to carry out the job. So that's going to be extremely important as we continue to move forward with foundations.
I think the other part of that is also that some of and this actually is a quote from Warren Buffett, some of the most impactful things that we are going to do are never going to be measurable. And that's where you need to tell the story so that people can make that connection and not dismiss the importance of the change that happens that you can see and witness, but you can't necessarily measure that.
Yeah, stories are powerful. One of the things I love about Craig, and anyone who has met Craig in West Palm, they know this. He's going to start with the stories. That guy knows more. He knows the families, and he can tell you the stories of the families in that community. And believe it or not, I'll tell you a story about our board. Again, very captains of industry, I call them, men and women who have succeeded in business. And we have made some pretty significant grants in terms of size of dollars. And I try to get them to come out on a site visit to a university where we started a medical school's residency program and the nursing programs, and these are pretty big dollars. I mean, we're signing big checks and try to get them to come out to site visits. Could not get them to come out. We started a program, which is really what has informed our upstream approach, which we call Quantum in the Community. And every year we allocate $1 million to grassroots organizations, mom and pop organizations that literally 2 or 3 people are running a food bank or a pantry. And when our board, when they learned we talked to them about the program, they thought, all right, we'll see how it goes. So we started making these really small grants, $5,000 here, $10,000 there, up to $25,000 for basic need support, the upstream, trying to figure out what's going on that's causing the sickness. People don't have food, can't get to the doctor. Well, we started doing this program, and the first breakfast that we hosted, we brought all of the nonprofit partners in to hand them the checks. And we had 2 or 3 board members come. And we would hear the stories of the people on the ground. And to this very day, that's been 9 years, 100% of our board will now attend that breakfast where we're handing out $5,000 and $10,000 because they love to hear the stories of families. They get a chance to meet the people who are in the communities. So the value of storytelling really is underrated. And I'm talking about us as foundations, and we're going to need help. And listen, I am appealing to those who are in this room. Foundations need help understanding the value of the story. We need metrics, and we're going to have metrics, but I believe the power of purpose-built evaluation is going to be to put quality and quantity on the stories and on how these stories lead to the right inputs and activities that ultimately drive the outcomes we're looking for. But those stories are going to be critically important, critically important.
So at our foundation, so we operate like a family foundation, very, very much like a family business. And one of the things I'm most proud of that our principal pushes is that once you get an operating grant from us, she wants you to be able to count on it. So we never go away unless something's really gone wrong. Mm-hmm. And we have been doubling and tripling our operating grants to the nonprofits that we serve, just to get out of their way and let them do their business. Do you have anything like that that you've got going on?
Yeah, well, and Craig and I talk about this. You know, Craig and I spend quite a bit of time together. I don't know if you noticed, but he's black and he's bald. It's required in West Palm Beach, apparently. Yeah. Maybe,
Does that mean I can't move there?
You can. You can come too. No, Craig and I spend time together. We've already started talking about requests for the year to come. And I said to him, I said, listen, bro. Listen, Craig. We need to start talking about multi-year investment in the operating of North End Rise. Now, talking about getting out of the way, one of the other things, now, my mother-in-law has a saying, I won't repeat it here, but there's a saying about opinions. Opinions are like certain body parts. Everybody has one. And I have a lot of opinions about how things should go. And that's the issue with foundations. We have lots of opinions because we have time to read. While people are out working, we're sitting in our offices reading articles and watching videos and on conference calls. And so we think we know all of this stuff because we read about it. I worked in the nonprofit sector prior to coming to the foundation. But one of the things I said to Craig is, listen, these resources are this is for the community. Now, I have opinions about a lot of things. The thing I've said to Craig is, listen, bro, I will make a lot of suggestions, and when they make absolutely no sense, you tell me, Eric, that makes no sense, and we'll move on. Because the thing that will happen for many of you is there's this feeling of, if a foundation makes a recommendation, that means we have to do it. And this has changed on our part. We're going to have to, as foundations, have to learn how to enter into partnerships where the executive director knows to say to the foundation leadership or to the program officer, hey, at this point in time, I appreciate your input, but let's talk about how we may do that differently. And there's data and there's all of these reasons and rationale, but for the kind of service that's being provided through this network, there comes a point, and I heard a lot of talk about burnout and self-care. There comes a point when you're just tired and you've been out all evening or early in the morning working with communities, and you show up at a meeting with a program officer or someone from a foundation who wants to pontificate on the things that he or she has just read. There's going to come a moment when you just need to say, listen, I really don't feel like hearing that right now. Seriously.
You think somebody will do that, really?
I am being honest. I don't know how we get here. What I'm talking about now, I don't know how we get to it, but we've got to put urgency on the upstream. We're pulling bodies out of the water. And foundations, we're still pontificating on matters that are esoteric. We've got to find a way. We've got to find a way that the people doing the work are going to be able to say, here's what's more important. And again, that's for our community, our philanthropic community. And it might be that, Carol, we start conversations with the Southeastern Council of Foundations, and we start conversations with the Georgia Funders and the Florida Philanthropic Network, because we need to talk to these foundations, I keep saying we because I'm a nonprofit guy, about how these relationships really need to work. So Craig has that permission to say, not today, Eric,
And this takes a lot of trust on
Yes.
Craig's part. He has to be able to trust
We talked about
you.
it last night at dinner.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's on us. We need to be more responsible for our part in that equation as a sector.
Yeah. And I know I'm making this sound much easier than it is going to be. And I recognize that I'm an early adopter of the concept of going upstream because I lived in it. I know what it's like. And so, I'm not saying that people in foundation world who have not had Brian Stevenson last night talked about proximity. If you have not been up close to this in a real way, the theory can overtake a moment. We've got to find a way to help this whole idea of proximity, and that's why we try to encourage the site visits and more foundations. As a matter of fact, I don't know how many of you have invited, I know they have site visits, but I'm talking whole boards. One of the things I want to do is bring our entire board to any one of the other purpose-built communities to get this full-on, I just knocked down some water.
It's okay, it wasn't open.
Okay, good. Full-on experience of this. We've got to become proximate to this, to the efforts. So I know I make it sound easy, but it's going to be incumbent upon this room to create a sense of urgency. Can I share a quote?
Please.
Okay. Y'all probably know by now, I'm a preacher. We don't know when to stop talking.
You are.
I'm a preacher. When we preach, we close the sermon like 5 times. But I'm closing. Number 1. It's a quote from James Baldwin, talking about progress. And I know that it does take time, but I have this sense of urgency now. In this room, we've got to create that sense of urgency for philanthropy. James Baldwin said, and I love it, you've got to look up the actual, I can do it no justice, the clip. He said, what is it that you want me to reconcile myself to? If you've ever heard him speak, he has this cadence. What is it that you want me to reconcile myself to? You told me that it takes time. It's taking my father's time, my mother's time, my sister's time, my brother's time, my auntie's time, my uncle's time, my niece's and my nephew's time. How much time do you want for your progress? We've got to create that urgency. And I don't know if watching clips like that to get to embody the sense of urgency, I go back to the point. We're pulling bodies out of the river, literally in many cases. And until we start the trek upstream, and this is foundations, for all of us in this room, we've got to create the sense of urgency. How much time do you want for your progress? And I often say things that are controversial. So I got to at least do one controversial, make one statement. Yesterday, I think Brian mentioned the crack epidemic that happened in black communities some years ago. And we created a war on drugs. And we're still trying to figure out what are we supposed to do with that. The bodies that are still being pulled out of the river. Now, I'm going to make this statement because this is a safe place to make it. We know how to solve issues of addiction. You know how I know? It begins with an O. When opioids hit the white community, we have poured resources, foundations, and philanthropy. I went to a session. Oh, no. Yeah, well, listen. Let's talk truth. Shame the devil. I went to a foundation session at a conference, room filled with, and no offense, middle-aged to older white philanthropists, family foundations. And the language was so different. They were saying, oh, yes, my grandson and my judge, I know a cousin of the judge. And one lady even said, we need to stop calling them addicts. This is a health issue. I wanted to stand up. Well, why wasn't it a health issue 20 years ago? What I'm saying is philanthropy, this room, we've got to create the sense of urgency for the communities we care about. Because right now, the systems care about what the systems care about. We've got to create the urgency. And that's one of the things I do, and Craig knows this about me. I said something at a session yesterday. I'm sure some people got a little unsettled. It's just who I am because we've got to get upstream. And this room, you're going to be the drumbeat. And you've got to ask the question, well, what is it that you want me to reconcile myself to? I know it takes time. But think about the generations of time, the people whose lives have already been pulled out of the river. And that's what we got to change the relationship.
What advice do you have? Because let me give you an example.
I didn't give enough already?
I'm gonna be really vulnerable right here.
Okay.
So I was just in a meeting I was helping doing some fundraising, and I was in a meeting with someone and I left mad at myself because it was shocking, rich white guy, and we were appealing to him, and he was unbearable, that like racist kind of not, of course you do, overt. And so you are sitting there stunned, and we just still want your money, man, but boy, are you racist. I mean, what are you supposed to say to these guys when you're in the middle of an ask and they're kind of smugly making these comments about those people and that kind of thing?
It was when I read Brian Stevens' book, and I didn't get a chance. I would love to talk to that guy. I want to be him when I grow up. Because I read his book, and he speaks with such eloquence, and he speaks with such control, and yet what he has seen makes him angry. And by the way, no indictment on anyone. One of the things I say often, this is nobody's fault in this room, but it's all of our responsibility. So I don't want it to sound like we're picking on any particular people group. But because I'm in those rooms, in Palm Beach, you better believe I'm in those rooms. You don't get to be the only black man in the entire state of Florida running a foundation and not be in rooms like this. What I have had to learn, because I'm a very emotional man, as you all can see, what I've had to learn is to muzzle my mouth and remember why I'm doing it. The reason I'm doing it is because I want to stop pulling bodies out of the river. And I know it's going to take time for people to get over their racist, for those who are, to get over those moments. So educating, and sometimes it's not education that's going to work. The stories, and even if the stories don't work, at the end of the day, I have to remember, you have to remember, why are we doing it? And it's to stop the bodies from coming down the stream. And there are times, and let's just be honest, there are times when you're going to have to just take it. You're going to have to just take it and grin and bear it, not to the point of disrespect and dishonor and feel that you have lost your sense of dignity. But I don't believe that anyone who is at least having a conversation and being racist really knows how not to. I mean, there's just this thing now. I mean, I was meeting with a developer in Palm Beach, because and one of the things I was going to say on my card that I completely forgot about is one of the things that philanthropy we've got to do. We've got to sit in those meetings now. We've got to be in the meetings with the developers, and we've got to be in the meetings with the big check writers. And I was in a meeting with a guy who made a comment, and he said, well, Eric, the problem is, it's like my sons. You give people stuff, and they don't appreciate it. Yeah. I think I was following his logic, that certain people don't want to work. And he went as far as to say, my dad taught me how to work hard, Eric. He's a developer, and he taught me how to work hard. And he literally said this to me. He said, I understand you've never seen anybody in your family work hard. Shut your mouth and keep on talking. Say what? You mean my mama who worked 14 hours a day in a dry cleaners pressing clothes for two men who went out and played golf all day and they paid her $9,000 a year? We don't work. I mean, and so I had to remember. Now, I'll be honest. You know what I said to myself, Mayor? I said, that's a whole lot I want to say right now, but I need you to build some houses for these people. Now, you have a low view of them, and you won't disrespect them because I'm going to protect them from your low view. But if you want to be a part of this, sometimes we got to just teach them, educate them, train them, because there's a lot. I'm from the projects, and I remind people that you can, this little jacket with this Q on it. I'm from the projects. But I have to remember why I'm doing it. So, and everyone in this room, you're going to have to remember why you're doing it. You got to remember your why. And we're going to run into it.
Yeah, we are. One of the things we are doing in Omaha is we're putting on training sessions for foundation staff on racial justice and equity and trying to get them to look at their own biases. And it seems a little elementary, but it's having an impact.
REI, Racial Equity Institute, that's one that we've been working with in Palm Beach. And to the credit of our business community, we took a trip up to Charlotte, I think MAC, Renaissance West, and 60 business leaders from Palm Beach County. We all went up, and we saw the model up there. And coming back, one of the things that our Economic Council decided to do was host an REI, a Racial Equity, Race Equity Institute training. Because there are people, now hear me say this, there are people who want to understand this narrative. And as Brian Stevenson said last night, we've got to change the narrative. We've got to stop dehumanizing and having such a low view. And so sponsoring, and that's another thing that foundations, we can sponsor these kinds of events that help change the narrative. And y'all, I'm so sorry, I was supposed to stay to my script, but as y'all see, I get carried away. I'm sorry, I know I'm all over the place.
You need a script.
Okay.
Are we, what time are we supposed to move to?
There was supposed to be a
questions?
15-minute show up somewhere.
I know.
Don't now listen, don't play with me because I'll stay up here for an hour and a half.
Okay. Okay.
Time for questions?
It's time for questions.
Okay. I don't know, but no one may have a question at this point in time. Okay.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you all so much. I'm a funder. I really appreciate the vulnerability and the transparency. I wanted to follow up on the Quantum in the Community program.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, that's an amazing investment, and we have tried some similar things, and I'm interested to learn more just operationally from you about how that works. But I'm curious because I think, bear with me a little bit in trying to kind of articulate this, but it sort of lays out a little bit of a tiered structure that certain nonprofits kind of have this ceiling, and I'm just wondering what work you do to understand how to support nonprofits to access greater funds as well and develop their capacity, so not to use the capacity building buzzword, but just trying to understand how we're not perpetuating a hierarchy even within the nonprofit sector.
Well, a couple of things. We recognize that the organizations who come for those smaller grants, they are where they are. And some of them, we encourage them to remain small and grassroots. But we do, in addition to the money we provide for the programs, we provide money for infrastructure development. And these are sessions that our foundation will pay for, that they can come in and they learn more about how to, budgets and volunteer management. So I do believe they have to be coupled. If you're working with small and grassroots, you have to have a coupling of education. The other thing is, for those who are going to be small and grassroots, just honor that fact. They're small and grassroots. And a lot of foundations, we've got to get comfortable with the fact that we literally wrote a check to Dot and Ruby. Those are the names of the people. And we sometimes have to close our eyes and say, you know what? We know that we're not going to get the kind of paperwork. And our application is 3 questions. And the reports at the end of the year are pictures and how many pounds of food. But we've got to rethink and reimagine philanthropy. So we do have to have some capacity building, to use that word. But on the other side of that, there is this thing where foundations have to let small grassroots nonprofits be small and grassroots. And you have to cringe a little bit because you're not going to get the kind of reporting you're expecting, like you're on $1 million grant or something like that. Mm-hmm. But we do have those education sessions for them.
Hello, Rich Shortino with Bryn Shore Development. We're a developer in a number of different initiatives, including in Omaha. This isn't really a question. It's you asked that everyone needs to be educated here, and I just wanted to make a comment. The difference. Those of us who are doing the development part of all of this, we've been doing this now for 25 years before Purpose-Built Community. And we didn't have a community quarterback. And so for the philanthropists in the room, I wanted to explain the importance of the purpose-built model versus what was being done before and what's still being done, and sort of these transformational attempts, Hope 6 and such. So we're from Chicago. We've been working on some of the toughest redevelopments, Robert Taylor homes, Cabrini Green, all the ones you've all heard about, without a community quarterback. In the city of Chicago was supposed to be the community quarterback. And so we've developed now a few thousand units of redevelopment in Chicago with no community quarterback. And the difference is that the community quarterback just changes the whole dynamic. Mm-hmm. We are unable to be the community quarterback as much as we try. Nobody takes the developer seriously as a community partner. However sincere we are in our efforts, we just do not have the standing to be the community quarterback. So investing in a community quarterback is critical to this work. Mm-hmm. Secondly, the education piece. We are, again, unable to focus on the education piece. And so it feels like, using Eric's analogy or metaphor, whatever it is, about the river, that when you're doing this work without the purpose-built model, you're going upstream, but you're not going all the way upstream. You're pulling bodies out of the water that are still alive, but that you're not getting to the problem. So we're making a difference by providing good quality housing, but we're not getting to the root cause. And the third thing, which is something that is really something that came from Kristen, when we were in Omaha, they asked us, we want a neighborhood of choice. Othello and Kristen, we want a place that any person can come to that chooses to come here. And so what do we have to do it? And I said, if you do this in Nebraska, this is similar to other states, there's not enough public resources in these states to fill that gap. And so what's going to end up happening is you're going to build 60 units 2 years later, 60 units 2 years later, and it's going to define itself as not a community of choice, but an affordable housing community, much like the Hope 6 developments that we've done. So if you want to make a difference, then you have to make a big difference up front. And you have to define the community as a community of choice, a place where market rate renters want to come and a place that's welcoming for affordable housing renters. And that means a big ask up front for the first phase. So for all of those funders who are in the room, fund the community quarterback, fund the education piece, and fund the first phase. Thanks.
Did you want to respond to that before I ask my question?
No, that was great.
Okay, fine. So I want to follow up on your comments about sustainability, and it sounded like your suggestion was the funders should expect the asker to keep coming back for operating expenses. And first of all, I'm Charlie McDowell. I'm chairman of the board of Reach Riverside, the Wilmington, Delaware Network affiliate. So in the business of asking for quite some time. And my experience in talking to foundations is that they definitely do want you to show sustainability. And in many cases, I take that to mean we don't want to be the only ones supporting you. You need to go out and find some other people to come in and help there. And that makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more about exactly the point you were trying to make there.
Well, we have to redefine what sustainability means. A nonprofit can't create profit to reinvest back into the company as does for-profits. There's always going to be a margin. So we just have to either redefine or take the word sustainability out. The question really is, how does your mission continue, and how do you continue to get the impacts you need? Well, we too, as a foundation, we want to see others involved, but my truth is, I know that right now, North and Rise, and there are other funders in our community who haven't even come to the table yet. So I have to have a clear understanding that for a while, God bless you, I have to have a clear understanding that no one else at this time is going to come to the table. So yeah, there is a point where you have to just take the word out and just say, we are going to be the first dollars in for the first 3 to 5 years. I'm just talking quarterback conversation right now. I mean, there's other sustainability. So yeah, you can start up something that ultimately is going to get funding from a city or another third-party payer. We're in healthcare, so we've actually funded things that help people get a panel, a certification or whatever, so they can get Medicaid or Medicare third-party payers. But in this particular setting, talking about quarterbacks, foundations have to understand that this does not happen unless we're paying for it. So in this conversation, I believe it's important to take either redefine sustainability or give a clear understanding that you're going to be in this for the long haul. I said to our board, we're going to be in this for 10 years. I just said a decade. We're going to be in it with North and Rise. We got to look at this as a long play. Will there be others come along? Yes. The fact that they're going to get $30 million or so from the city, that's great. But we're still going to have to be at the table because the city's not funding Craig and his operation. That's for some of the other infrastructure. So we just need to redefine sustainability.
Thank you.
I think that it also includes just being detail-oriented and following up with all of your donor base in your community. Whether or not they're giving, you want to be in front of them once a year so that you at least have the conversation that's happening behind the scenes. We're connecting with each other, at least we are in Omaha. I'm assuming you are
Yeah,
too.
we do.
So we're talking to each other. Did you meet with so-and-so? Did you talk about this? Did you hear about that? You need to be part of that conversation. And that takes, I mean, just once a year, go down the list and go to all those donors, whether or not they have given to you. The more you're in front of them, just consistently sharing your story, talking about successes, talking about barriers, the more they're going to get that feeling, that fear of being left out, and they're going to want to be a part of it. They're going to want to talk about you and say that they met with you. Frankly, it is that simple sometimes.
Yeah.
And then I would offer to sort of push back on that sustainability question. If you are tapping local government, federal government, and your area foundations, that's your sustainability plan. You've got this mix of donors. It's not about push back when they say, well, we'll give you 3 years and then we're gonna go away and do something more fun. I mean, that is really a ridiculous thing that foundations do. We've gotta commit 10 years, 20 years. I've basically said, I guess until we're dead. I mean, we're here.
Until it's done.
Yeah, until the work is done.
Until it's done. And I'm going to, well, question. Was there a question there? Okay. Because here's what I say. Again, we have to create a narrative of urgency that makes the sustainability question mute. Because again, I go back to when we want to do something as a society, we do it. I mean, I've never been in a room where this much detail around sustainability and data was presented when we talked about opioids. I'm just going to be honest about it. We're not creating a narrative of urgency enough. That's why the sustainability question gets in the way, because we haven't created enough of a narrative of urgency. When we want to get something done, the truth is, as a society, we get it done. I know my answers, by the way, are not textbook, because the textbook is what got us where we are today.
Just a quick question. I know we're almost out of time. Janet from Portland, Oregon, Albina Vision Trust. We're a fairly new nonprofit. We got our first operating money from a foundation. And in that application, we said we'd like you, because of mission alignment, to be our inaugural funder, and then help us gather foundations together, the next 3 or 4, to talk together. They didn't even respond to that concept of foundations joining together for a common purpose. Were we way off on that? Do you all ever join together?
Yeah.
We do this all the time. So did you put it in a letter?
Well, yeah, and we had a conversation about it, but it went
And they
nowhere.
weren't interested?
Yeah.
Find somebody else to convene.
Okay.
In Omaha, there are only a couple people willing to, in the foundation community, willing to convene the other funders in the area. So just keep hunting. You'll find somebody.
Okay, great, thank you.
Hi, I'm Thayer DuPont with the Longwood Foundation. I sit in your seat, and I am following up on Charlie's comment. We have funded in Wilmington. We're in Delaware. We're the largest funder in the state. And that sustainability question is linked to the fact that we get $2.50 a request for every dollar we have to give in every 6-month cycle. So we cannot sustain all of the requests that we get. How do you resolve that? I assume you get more requests than you have available.
Absolutely. We say no to the ones we can't fund.
Okay, so why is this one different?
Purpose-built?
I'm already bought into purpose-built,
Okay.
but that doesn't mean I can make a decade-long commitment.
Right.
Because
Well,
there's gonna be another
Right.
very meaningful community project just in 6 months.
Well, that's what foundations have to do around planning and determining priorities. And I do believe that foundations' priorities drive their tolerance and appetite for what we're willing to do and for what period of time we're willing to do it. So we say no to several projects, and we'll do a 1-year commitment here or a 2-year commitment there. Okay. And what I say, Mr. DuPont, is that there are certain issues in our communities that are long-standing and requires much more time to unravel. And we, as foundations, have to understand those projects versus the things that you can do in a 1-shot deal or 2-shot deal. The things that are long-standing, very difficult to unravel, very difficult to dismantle, foundations, I believe we do have to understand that even if we are the sole funder on a project like this over time, that means there are going to be no's to a lot of other things we've done in the past. I'm only speaking for one foundation. Every foundation maybe can or won't do it that way, but for those who can, we have to prioritize, and that's what strategic planning is. We have to prioritize the things that we're going to work on, and for the period of time that we're going to do it. So I mean, that's what I say about timing.
I would offer, so the former president of the Robin Hood Foundation, I don't recall their name, but said something that really struck me, which is, it was in relation to the fact that a lot of foundations are only giving away the bare minimum, that 5%. And the quote is, why would we save money for a rainy day when it's pouring outside? And I think that's a place where foundations need to stop being so precious with themselves, that we need to exist forever and give the money away, get it out the door.
Let me just, I know we got to go, but here's what I'll say. The whole world of philanthropy is changing. And I know I embody this moment that we've just got to completely reimagine what philanthropy is and how we do it. I don't know what it will be in 10 years, but we've got to just completely reimagine and think about philanthropy differently.